the story of Jesus Christ is the only story of someone who followed the heavenly heart of our Father in heaven. And when these magi, these ancient astronomers, when they tell King Herod that there's a star in the sky, and based on their studies, this star is pointing to a newborn king in Bethlehem, Matthew's gospel tells us that Herod was disturbed and all of Jerusalem with him. Why were they disturbed? The people of Jerusalem probably heard this after the fact. Otherwise, they would have warned the Magi to not go to King Herod for help. By the time the people of Jerusalem heard about this, it was too late. But it seems clear the people of Jerusalem wished the Magi had not gone to King Herod for help. The people of Jerusalem wished that the Magi had not made King Herod aware of the birth of a newborn king in his region. Now, the Magi clearly didn't think Herod would be disturbed by this, thinking he'd be happy to help them find a newborn Messiah. So being the king of a Jewish region, Herod has access to scribes and scholars, so Herod calls his chief priests and his teachers of the law, and he asks them where the scriptures say the Messiah is going to be born. And Herod tells the Magi that the Messiah will be born in Bethlehem. Based on the scriptures, the Messiah is going to be born in Bethlehem. So Herod sends the Magi on their way. And this is what Herod says to the Magi.
"Go and search for the child carefully. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may worship him."
And I believe, as the Magi left, they left believing that King Herod was helping them. From what we can tell, it seems the Magi left King Herod believing that King Herod genuinely wanted to give the Magi helpful information about where to find the Messiah by telling them that the scriptures said the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. But Matthew's gospel tells us that when King Herod heard about a newborn king in his region, he was disturbed, and all the people of Jerusalem with him. Why were they disturbed? Because the people of Jerusalem knew things about King Herod that the Magi didn't know. I doubt the Magi knew about this, that when Herod was king, he killed 46 members of the Jewish Sanhedrin, Jewish leaders who had authority in legal and judicial processes. Herod killed them because clearly their authority in legal and judicial processes were getting in King Herod's way. Their authority was restricting King Herod from doing what he wanted to do, and so Herod killed them. I doubt the Magi knew that when King Herod was king, he married a woman named Mariamne, the daughter of a Jewish high priest. Now the problem was, when Herod decided to marry Mariamne, the daughter of a Jewish high priest, Herod was already married to a woman named Doris, and he had a son with Doris. So Herod just banished his wife and child. So I imagine when people realized that Herod banished his wife and child so that he could marry the granddaughter of a Jewish high priest, people thought King Herod was only doing this for political reasons to build favor with the Jews. But Josephus tells us that King Herod was genuinely in love with Mariamne. His love for her inflamed daily. Now, if you think King Herod banishing his wife and child was horrible, it gets so much worse. So King Herod genuinely loved Mariamne, but Mariamne found being married to King Herod was very difficult and eventually heartbreaking. Mariamne had a younger brother named Aristobulus. Herod made Mariamne's younger brother a high priest, and Josephus tells us that Mariamne's younger brother Aristobulus was getting favor among the people, and Herod got jealous, so he had Mariamne's brother killed. Josephus tells us Herod pretended to be sorrowful over her brother's death, but Mariamne always believed that King Herod killed her brother. And she made it very clear how upset she was with King Herod. And Herod had a sister, Salome, who had a grudge against Mariamne. She filled Herod's mind with lies that Mariamne was cheating on King Herod. And in a state of madness, King Herod killed his wife. He had his wife and her supposed lover executed. And after he had her executed, he became delirious with sorrow for her. He became incredibly regretful that he killed her. But he had intense paranoia that she was cheating on him, and in a state of madness he killed his wife. Herod had 2 sons with Mariamne, Alexander and Aristobulus, and Herod's sister filled Herod with fears that his sons wanted to kill him to avenge their mother. It was likely that these fears were true because his sons were incredibly vengeful that their father killed their mother. And fearing that his sons were going to kill him, Herod killed his sons. He killed his 2 sons. He had him strangled. So this man was willing to kill members of his family. This is the story of a man whose power went through his head, because his sense of identity was with the power he had. He found his self-worth in his power, and when anyone threatened his power, he had him killed, even if they were members of his family, even if they were someone he loved. So when the Magi come to King Herod telling him that there's a birth of a newborn king, the people of Jerusalem knew Herod killed his wife. because her supposed adultery was a threat, was an insult to his power. The people of Jerusalem knew Herod killed his 2 sons because they were a threat to the power he had. He was willing to kill members of his own family. He was willing to kill people he loved if they were a threat to his power. So when the Magi tell King Herod about the birth of a newborn king, the people of Jerusalem knew that King Herod would see the birth of a newborn king in his region as a threat to his power, and he'd want this newborn killed because he found his self-worth in the power he had. King David was a man who wanted to please God. King Herod was a man who wanted to be God. And before King Herod, there were descendants of King David who wanted to be God. King David knew that you found satisfaction by pleasing God. But there were kings after King David who searched for satisfaction by trying to be God, by trying to find satisfaction by doing things their way. But there comes a point where you recognize that what you think will satisfy you is never going to satisfy you. And people like King David knew that. What you think will satisfy you will never satisfy you. And when you try to follow your own ideas of when you try to follow your own ideas of what will satisfy you, that's you trying to be God. The Old Testament shows us stories of people who were deceived by the desires of their heart. And that's what led the way for someone like King Herod to become king. There was a night and day difference between King David and King Herod. King Herod was as far as it gets from a man after God's heart. Because King Herod was a man who was deceived by the desires of his heart. He saw that anyone who was a threat to his power, he thought he'd find satisfaction by killing them. So much so that he was willing to kill members of his own family, people he loved. So at the start of the New Testament, we see the tragic effects of what happened in the Old Testament. The world is led by people who are following the deceitful desires of their heart instead of people like King David following God's heart. Even King David was deceived by the deceitful desires of his heart. So the New Testament makes it clear our only hope is to be led by someone who'd be solely devoted to following the desires of God's heart. Our only hope is to follow someone who would follow the desires of God in heaven. And the only person who'd follow the desires of a God in heaven is someone who came from heaven. It's a tragic story where King Herod, the Magi don't come back to King Herod to inform him about exactly where the Messiah is because the Magi had been warned. The Magi were warned in a dream to not go back to King Herod. So King Herod never knew where exactly in Bethlehem the Messiah was. And because Herod couldn't find out exactly which child was the newborn king in Bethlehem, he decided to kill every child in Bethlehem, every child under the age of 2.
My men, you know what I fear, so you know what must be done. Go to Bethlehem and turn their blood and bones into dust, and do not return until your uniforms are stained with the blood of all the babes of Bethlehem. Go to Bethlehem. Make your swords red. Pierce your swords through every one of them if you can. Rip them from their mother's arms if you have to. If anyone tries to flee, send your arrows through their brain or run them down. Crush the brains of anyone stupid enough to think they could flee from me. And when you come back, I want you all covered in the blood of all the babes of Bethlehem. Turn their blood and bones into dust. No child in Bethlehem will come anywhere near my throne.
So the evil of King Herod, it's a tragic story, but it's a story that shows us why Jesus had to come into the world. Because the world is ruled by people who follow the deceptive desires of their heart. The story of King Herod shows us that the kings, the rulers of this world, too many of them follow the selfish desires of their heart instead of following God's heart. The story of King Herod shows us why Jesus had to come into the world. The story of King Herod shows us why we need Jesus, because there are too many people in leadership who are deceived by the desires of their heart. The Bible shows us that you do not find satisfaction by following the desires of your heart. Our hearts are so influenced by the darkness of this world, and the darkness of this world is always going to deceive our hearts. So our only hope is to follow someone who's not from this world. Our only hope is to follow someone from heaven. Our only hope is to follow someone who will only follow the desires of God's heart. And the story of Jesus is the only story about someone who only followed the desires of God's heart. The story of Jesus Christ is the only story of someone who only followed the desires of God in heaven. The story of Jesus Christ is the only story of someone who only followed the desires of God's heart. The story of Jesus Christ is the only story of someone who followed the heavenly heart of our Father in heaven. His story shows us we only find satisfaction by following God's heart. King Herod tried to find satisfaction by trying to be God, by trying to satisfy all of his pleasures, by trying to satisfy all the pleasures of his heart. But Jesus Christ shows us you only find satisfaction by following the desires of God's heart. Thank you so much for watching. Look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great day.